thank you all for all of the speakers for joining, and welcome to all of our attendees. This next webinar I've been super excited about since we started putting it together about 6 weeks ago. And today we're going to talk about perspectives from the hacker community during the COVID-19 pandemic. We think about all the changes that have happened in our own lives, but it also is true that the hackers and other sort of more malicious communities also have a change in opportunity and a change in the types of tactics that they're using. I want to put out a huge thank you to our members who help support these webinars and the speakers who volunteer to give their time and energy to talk, and to all of our volunteers who help put this together. Bay Cybersecurity Institute is dedicated to extending cybersecurity education and finding those ideas that can help us develop and move the industry forward. And this webinar is a wonderful opportunity to get to hear from both the industry participants and government sides and academic. We're trying to put all of that together in our series. So before I hand it over to the experts who know much more about this area and are going to be giving us a lot of insight, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about where do you find hackers. And it's true that you find them in all sorts of different types of areas, anywhere that they can communicate and collaborate. But one of the features that helps them and hurts the good guys is anonymity. They really need the ability to communicate and share information anonymously. And I have been in network security for a very long time, and so I think the most interesting part about that is how do you provide anonymity to a community? And so the biggest, the most common one that you've probably heard about, the one that you see on TV shows and in movies, is generally referred to as the dark web, and they're generally referring to Tor, which is a onion routing system that allows people to communicate over the dark web. You can think of it as an overlay on top of the internet where you can exist in both at the same time. And the real difference is that when you send a packet to, let's say you want to talk to your mom on the internet, you send the packet for the purposes of this discussion directly. It tries to find the best route through the internet to get to her directly. Through Tor, what they do is they encrypt each of those layers, and you send it to a couple of different Tor routers, and they decrypt it, peeling off what we think of as the onion, and then send it on. And so by the time it reaches your mom, it's gone through so many layers and obfuscations that you can't trace it back to the source. That's the intention of the software. It has super benefits. It allows people to communicate anonymously, which isn't just for hackers. It can be used for speaking out against an oppressive government. It can be used for being able to freely share ideas. But of course, it's also used for criminals, and they have their own community of scam artists inside that feed on other dark web members. And so it really, the benefits of anonymity is also the flip side of downside of you don't have no protections, you have no governmental oversight, you have no controls. And then if you combine that with Bitcoin that has risen, you really have this area where you can do commerce, you can sell things, and you can trade things on the dark web now that you couldn't do before. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over with that sort of little background of how to get started, I'd like to start handing it over to our experts. First up is Tom Richards, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of GroupSense. And he has been working and communicating in this field a lot and has done some really amazing technology, as well as helped develop a business around helping us learn better the needed things to move forward from hackers. So Tom, you want to take it from there?
Thank you, Diana. Just share my screen here. All right. How does that look, Diana? Can you just verify?
Yeah, that looks good.
Perfect. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. As Diana said, my name is Tom Richards. I work with GroupSense. We prepared an investigation today entitled "You Need a Bigger Boat." It's an investigation into SBA fraud, Small Business Association fraud. The presentation is going to be 3 phases. One, where we just explore the potential for this fraud. The second stage is takes us into the various deep web forums and marketplaces, kind of the locales within Tor or other areas of the internet where threat actors and fraudsters are operating. We went to these places. Well, we do this normally as we conduct our business, but we look in these places to try to find evidence and monitor threat actors who are taking advantage of the SBA. And in the last phase, we will review the results and the evidence we gathered and talk about some of the threat actor outcomes. All right, so just a little bit of context. Our research team sees all types of fraudulent criminal activity that you can imagine. Some of it's very straightforward, like the sale of illegal drugs, counterfeit goods, or even weapons. Other activity is a bit more involved, and you'll see an example of this is one threat actor who's very good at exploiting systems, getting remote access. This threat actor, all he wants to do is get the access, transact the sale. Now, threat actor number 2 comes along. This individual is more dangerous because they want to, using that remote access, really do damage to the business. They might exfiltrate some sensitive information or intellectual property. They might blackmail an individual. And actually, a lot of the ransomware activity that you've seen recently has been facilitated by some of these transactions. Okay, so that's background, some quick examples. In all of this nefarious activity, there is a wide variety of an array of private data that's being circulated. So our researchers know this, and they challenge themselves with a question. When it comes to the government loan programs related to the pandemic, do the sharks sense an opportunity? We need to start by understanding what it actually takes if the threat actors are going to exploit this. So you need 2 things. Firstly, you need a business. Now, the threat actors, they have an operation for sure, but it's certainly not what the government would classify as a business. So they need somebody else's business. Easy enough, right? The second phase, or the second part of this equation, and this comes to no surprise to anyone who's ever worked with, in, or around the government, you need a stack of paperwork. Okay, so when it comes to finding a target and finding a business, the first part, the threat actor knows that they're going to have a low opportunity for success if they apply for one of these loans posing as a major corporate brand. They're much more successful if they can focus on a smaller organization. This is quite similar to the increase that we see in credit card fraud during the holiday season, right? The threat actors kind of hide in the noise. Because so many of the loans that are being applied for to the SBA are small, medium businesses, the threat actors can take advantage of that and similarly kind of swim or go with the flow, stay in the current. This has got some other added benefits targeting a small business. These small businesses are much more closely aligned with an individual identity. So we have some interesting stats here on the screen. About 10% of Americans have been a victim of identity theft at one time or another. Of that 10%, 30 to 35 million individuals, 20% of them are repeat victims. This means that there's a lot of data out there, a lot of information that the threat actors can utilize. So the other piece of information on the slide here, we have cost and we have techniques. The techniques directly relate to time. So some of the techniques are very targeted, hacking a cell phone, taking advantage of someone's credit monitoring report, pivoting from that credit monitoring report to get access to your other personal information and accounts. Some of it's very broad scope. The top bullet is We talk about searching for credentials in previously breached databases. Third-party breach databases are an ongoing issue, and there's a lot of sensitive details within that data. Threat actors harvest this, and they're constantly using it to their advantage in other exploits. If you want to just go out and buy one of these things, it is possible. There's a market for it. And a full kit is going to cost anywhere between $1,000 and $1,500. On the right-hand side, and the bottom right-hand side, you'll see this ticker. And this is going to increase as we kind of add time or add cost to the process. So just keeping that in mind. All right. Now, that second part of the equation, the large stack of paperwork, I will spare you all. I'm not going to read through these, but these are kind of normal operating documents for a business, the normal byproduct you have. We talk about some tax information, payroll information, financial statements, other pieces of evidence just to prove that you are running and operating a real entity. Something to keep in mind is that these loan applications, they don't require the highest fidelity information. So the cost, because of that, the cost is going to vary. It'll actually be reduced in some cases because you don't need a physical copy. You don't need something that's, you know, incredibly high def. Ultimately, scans and soft copies will work. That's advantageous to the threat actors. All right, so one of the first ones here, these documents are actually free. Articles of incorporation, bylaws, operating agreements. They take virtually no time at all to identify, and you can find them from just simple searching clear web resources. Business registration sites offer these as kind of a courtesy, and once you have the data that we talked about in the first part of the equation, it's as simple as filling in the blanks. So really, we're looking at only increasing our time, our $1,500 in about 3 weeks' time to an additional 20 minutes maybe of effort. Really not very much. Next, we have driver's licenses. Now, in a good identity kit, you're going to get a driver's license. However, if you don't, they can be purchased sort of a la carte. This is a screenshot from a darknet marketplace where a lot of this activity and these documents can be acquired. You see a sample, there's a threat actor name, it shows some of their payment history, even reputation details and trust. Now, these marketplaces, similarly to Amazon or something, they rely on reviews and reputation. It's not like you can walk into this guy's driver's license shop and see the quality of his goods. He needs people to vouch for him. That's really how they have repeat business. You'll notice this, a driver's license can be acquired quite easily, $30 and a day's time. It's surprisingly straightforward. We have some payroll expense documents and things like this, financial documents. Financial documents generally come at a premium. There's more effort required, there's more customization, and you can see some of the prices in this post. They range from $10 all the way up to $850. We have, for the purposes of our counter, we've gone on the high end just to show you what the ultimate cost might be. Moving on through the list, again, I-9 forms, very simple, very straightforward. That same marketplace, $35, 1 day's time. It's really important to keep in mind that the market for these documents existed in some capacity prior to COVID. What the pandemic showed us is the demand greatly increased. And that is kind of an interesting observation that we had. again, it does not increase, these documents do not increase the cost or time frame very much at all. All right, so some financial documentation. Now, this is one of the more interesting findings and pieces of research, but our researchers engaged with a threat actor who is claiming to have access to a server owned or operated by a certified public accountant. This is a very kind of exciting finding to us because, well, it shows a couple of things. Firstly, it's a good time to take a beat and remind ourselves that, you know, your personal security, your organizational security might be top notch. You might think you have everything in order, but you really have to think about your partners and suppliers. They are another link in the chain. And in this case, or for the customers of this particular accounting firm, the supplier is the weak link. So this chat is actually from a direct chat where this threat actor is offering up thousands of 1040s. Any number of documents are available to us, but we don't know the exact cost, but judging from other documents on the market and kind of prices and norms, we can say that documents are going to range anywhere from maybe a few $100s all the way up to $1,500 on the high end. Another comment just to make, this is only one server, one threat actor. You know, when there's smoke, there's fire, and it's very likely that a whole host of other threat actors have this same access, and other organizations are in danger. Okay, so the last document required, or the last few documents that are required, bundled up into one here: utility, mortgage, and rent statements. On the top right, that screenshot kind of step back, you can see utilities, they take a day turnaround time, $55. On the bottom here, you have a custom mortgage statement. For these mortgage statements, you actually provide the threat actor the information you need, like principal or remaining escrow, things like this, and they will customize it for you. This takes a little bit more time, but still incredibly affordable. So when we saw how straightforward it was, well, for someone who knows where to look, this is straightforward. For someone who knows where to look, the total time to acquire these documents is about 3 to 4 weeks. You know, it could be more, it could be less, give or take, but that's a fine baseline. That's not too much time, especially considering the amount of work and effort that you actually had to put into it. When we're talking about cost, we're looking anywhere from $2,500 up. And again, it might be cheaper, it might be a little bit more expensive. Now, that is a great return on investment for a threat actor. $2,500 to get a loan of a few $1,000s, several hundred, or excuse me, $10,000 or more. Great return on investment. But what I want to highlight here is that the research that I just showed you, that was done at the very start of the pandemic, when the loan programs were being developed and announced and things like that. So think April or May timeframe. If we fast forward to July, we have a bit of an evolution or a mutation. Compare this information you see with the identity kits that I first showed you. What was once $1,500 in several weeks is now being sold in bulk at drastically reduced price with virtually no turnaround time. So the total cost gets slashed to around $1,000, and you're looking at only a few days' time to compile all the information required. The return on investment essentially got that much easier. And you actually see that this offering mentions the SBA. It's previously everything was piecemeal. You get this document, you get that document, whatever it is, but this post, the threat actor is actually referencing the Small Business Association. So that's a pretty significant change in the market. The redacted details in the front there are samples of what is being offered. So it's not just an individual that you then have to associate with a business, but in many cases, the information being provided has both the details. This screenshot is a guide. So not only does the market mature by having something, having a more kind of consolidated product, but you have guides now. I should mention that with the purchase of documents on the previous slide, you get instructions on how to use it. This individual has posted a guide in the forum in the black. The front right message is an excerpt from a chat where someone's advertising it. These threat actors are trying to ensure that either the product you are buying is high quality and you're successful in using it. Again, so you come back, so their reputation is increased. Other threat actors are offering assistance and they'll work with you to kind of share in the spoils. So you see that comment there, let's make some bread. This screenshot shows, it might be hard to see a little small in the bottom left-hand side, a couple of steps, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 6. This document carries on beyond the capacity of a slide, but it shows 20 to 30 steps that that walk you through. The threat actors are also very considerate in providing kind of some tips and tricks. They tell you, make sure that you're submitting information that isn't blurred out. You don't want to, as we've redacted some stuff, you don't want to do anything like that. You want to be sure, they actually prioritize some of the documents. So tax and financial documents are a higher priority than some of the other documents. And they mentioned, of course, typos. It's good to know that these threat actors have integrity in their process. Make sure you're providing accurate information, you're getting the right industry code, the right EIN, things like this. All right, so is it too late with all that we've seen, all the evidence that we've seen? Is it too late for the Small Business Association? Congress seems to think so, yes. This is an article from the Washington Post on September 1st, so it's last week. A congressional subcommittee found significant fraud risk with the PPP loan program and has admitted that loans may have been diverted to criminals. Can we be sure? Well, this is a conversation, again, from a private chat. This is one of the locations where threat actors kind of trade information, talk about exploits, things like this. You see the highlighted message in the middle of the screen. One individual is claiming to have an SBA loan pending for $800,000. That is one of the more substantial claims that we've observed. Whether or not they were successful is well, a very big question, but the fact that they were able to even get a loan application to the point of being pending shows that, well, it's a feat in and of itself. We have another example here, extremely high fidelity, I know, but this is a photo of someone's screen, a threat actor's screen. They took this photo, they uploaded it again to one of those channels that I mentioned before. They have taken taken control of this bank account, use this bank account to have the loan application send the money here. The threat actor is claiming that this nearly $10,000 balance is the result of an SBA loan. This is a common practice. Threat actor overseas might not have their own account, might not be able to create a US account. So again, they steal one, and they'll now transfer the money out through some sort of intermediary, maybe something like PayPal, or even a wire balance. Now, these are only two examples, but we've observed many others, many other claims of successful applications, pending applications. I'm sure there's countless attempts that have been made that go unreported or unacknowledged, unobserved. I would say that, unfortunately, during the times of the pandemic, we believe that the sharks are certainly getting their fill. With that, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to attend. I hope you all stay healthy and safe.
Thanks, Tom. That was excellent. So what does GroupSense do with this information as you go out and you talk to these threat actors?
So our primary goal is ultimately to kind of provide intelligence and counterintelligence to our clients. Some of this information or some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures help our clients to increase their awareness, increase their posturing, things like that. This SBA information was done strictly as a research project. But
go ahead. Do you work with law enforcement to help coordinate what you find as well?
Often, yes. And some of the incidents where we're brought in, I mentioned ransomware earlier. We've been doing a lot of ransomware negotiations. That certainly involves, considering the size and scope and the types of businesses involved, that requires engagement and inclusion of law enforcement. So we're there side by side with maybe the FBI, counsel, insurance, so on and so forth.
Sounds great. And we had one question, which was, will the when the PPP loans are required to be paid back, will that detect the fraud? Will the companies be on the hook for that? Or will that money be lost?
That's a very interesting question. I imagine, and I can only speculate because we haven't seen it yet, but I imagine very similarly to a situation, an identity theft situation where a credit card is taken out in someone's name and then charges are made. The individual or the business that has been compromised or is the victim in this case, the burden of proof would be on them to, show that they didn't just make off with the money and that they were in fact kind of spoofed. But no, very good question, and I'm interested to see how that actually pans out.
Okay. Thank you so much for presenting, and hopefully we'll have more questions for you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Paulo Shakarian, who is the CEO of CyRecon, and he's going to walk us through another example. His company is focused on both from the hacker community as well as machine learning, trying to find out what we can learn from their community. So thank you, Paulo.
Thank you, Diana. Really appreciate everyone joining the webinar today. So we're going to talk about combining information from the sources that Tom spoke of, deep web, dark web, and others, with machine learning in order to predict the actions of hackers. And so I'm just going to do this in terms of 3 case studies, so kind of going along the theme for how we started this webinar. And the first is a ransomware one, quite appropriate as we dovetailed into that at the end of Tom's talk. Now, in August, University of Utah paid $457,000 in ransom to hackers. And they did this because, according to the news articles at the time, is they wanted to prevent the hackers from leaking data about the students and employees that they gained from the incident. Now, there was a similar attack like this against Michigan State in June, who we don't know how much they paid, but they also paid the ransom. And both these attacks have been attributed to the NetWalker ransomware gang. And so in looking at this, the first question I think a lot of people bring up is, is it a good idea to pay the hackers? The University of Utah made in their press statements, they said, hey, we could recover this data from backup. We chose to pay because we want to protect our personnel. But here's the problem with that reasoning. So we did this analysis looking at deep and dark web forums and marketplaces. So along the lines of what Tom was discussing, where hackers are buying and selling things like leaked data, malware, exploits, and so on. And so let me pull up the laser pointer. And so these big turquoise circles, they represent the various websites where these transactions take place. And the purple dots are individuals who are selling leaked data. So you see many of these marketplaces, there's quite a few who are selling this kind of information. And when you look at the hackers that are selling ransomware, those are in the black dots. So there's much fewer of those, but this we would expect, because to create a piece of malicious software that's functional to the point of being able to sell, and also that is generally not being detected, is not as easy as gaining stolen data and selling that. Finally, the interesting ones are hackers who are selling both. And these are individuals that are represented by the red dots. Now, the fact that there are red dots present is a big hint about that there is potential overlap between those who conduct ransomware attacks and those who sell leaked data. We also see, just by virtue of looking at this, it's very clear that the same marketplaces where one is sold, the other is sold as well. So the communities are intermingling. And what's even more interesting is there's individuals like this guy who sells both ransomware and leaked data. He's participating in at least 3 marketplaces according to this. And there's many individuals like that. And you notice these people who have ties to multiple marketplaces, the red dots are disproportionately represented. So what that tells us is there's a good chance that someone creates ransomware, they sell the ransomware on one site, but when they take their results from an attack they do, the leaked data, they're going to another site and selling it. The other thing also to watch out for is that there's malware that will also have backdoors for the original authors. So this is like the case where I write ransomware, I sell it to people, and they maybe are operating with some sort of honor code where if they take the data and the ransom is paid, they never give it. But in that ransomware that I wrote, I put a little backdoor, and I'm siphoning all that data that my clients are gathering. And so in paying the ransom to the attacker, you have no control over data that the author of the ransomware has as well. And so this is another opportunity for monetization. Point being is that University of Utah gained zero protection against their people by paying the ransom. I would be very doubtful that they decrease the likelihood of those people's data getting exposed. And I would think that, they're still going to find themselves in a position where they'll have to pay for identity protection for the students and employees whose data was exposed. So how do we avoid attacks like this? Well, this is what we've done. And this originally started as research for the Director of National Intelligence. And what we do is we collect data along the lines of what GroupSense does. But unlike what GroupSense is doing, where they're looking at fraud investigations and things like that, we're collecting the data in order to predict software exploit usage. So it's a very specific use case, but an important one. And the way we do this is the data we collect, we extract various types of indicators based on the content, what the hackers are saying, their social structure, who's talking to whom, who are the more reputable hackers within the community, the people who can advertise an exploit or ransomware in a marketplace and get away with selling it for $20,000. metadata about the hacker communities, what's normally happens when something is discussed on this website, as well as technical information about software itself. So aligning the expertise of the hackers with the types of attacks that they're going to launch. Now, from these indicators, we use machine learning to extract different types of features that can then be used in the predictive classifier. So we actually now use a very complex machine learning infrastructure that leverages 60 different machine learning models. And those feed into computing the probability of exploitation, and then how this gets used by security personnel, typically within vulnerability management, because they're the ones who focus on the decision about what to patch and what not. But also we do see IT use cases in patch management, as well as cloud and DevSecOps are emerging use cases. So let's look at the NetWalker ransomware. Here's one of the vulnerabilities that was used. What you're seeing here is tracking of the probability or the likelihood of exploitation, we call the PSI rating score, versus time. So when you look at the beginning here, this is in 2019 in late August. It was already pegged at about 11 times more likely to be exploited than average. And based on the threat intel from these hacker communities, the machine learning prediction hovered right around 10 until when there was significant evidence of available exploits being launched, that it skyrocketed up to 38. So what's the story here? Well, the NetWalker ransomware was really dependent on two vulnerabilities, both of which, the other one, there was a similar trend to this, where again, it was the machine learning algorithms had predicted in mid to late 2019. And so in terms of making the decision on what to patch, that's doable. And what's really different about looking at a machine learning result like this, as opposed to, say, standard techniques, standard practice, you're looking at evaluation of risk by the National Institute of Standards. About 60% of software vulnerabilities fall in the high and critical level. Whereas if you're taking a predictive approach like this, we're seeing, much smaller percentage of vulnerabilities are falling at the level where you need to take action, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20%. And that's exactly why stuff like this, attacks that could be avoidable, happen, is because, folks have only so many resources to patch and upgrade, and they can't necessarily direct it against the emerging threats. So let's look at a second case study. Russian hackers steal COVID-19 research. This was reported in July. It was attributed to the APT29 hacker group, also known as Cozy Bear, and it involved about 4 different vulnerabilities that were exploited. So I'm actually going to switch screens here. And what you're seeing is a dashboard view that's customizable of our predictive software. And what I configured this to show a file that has software vulnerabilities that were used in the Russian Cozy Bear attacks to steal COVID-19 vaccine research. So when we look at this, I'll click on one to get some metadata. And what we see here is, just like the other graph I showed you, here you see the time-based trends on how the likelihood of exploitation has changed over time. And we see right away the vulnerability was disclosed. It was only looking at a 1.04, so just 4% more likely to be exploited. But that quickly changed about a day later, and it jumped up to about 5.6 times more likely to be exploited. And we see as the threat intelligence was collected over time, the rating went up and up until it was, to a very high level. And, the nice thing about this is when you're looking at a group of vulnerabilities, you can start to prioritize by the likelihood that one will be threatened. Now, also, what's neat about this is you saw a bunch of snippets from hacker communities from the group sense part of the talk. this solution also provides very similar stuff as well. So here we see right away discussions in a Russian language forum about Iranian hackers using the vulnerability and selling it. Scrolling down more, we can go a little bit back in time. We see also some information from Twitter augmenting it. We see information about hackers who are probing Citrix controllers using the vulnerability. And then, you can look back through the whole entire history. So what's nice about this is we've seen a couple of things. We have worked with companies where they had rules that they were not able to patch certain vulnerabilities that were deemed unimportant. And and this is not surprising, about 58% of businesses state that they're still using legacy devices that are beyond their life cycle. And those things are very difficult to deal with from a patching perspective. And so in order to justify patching or upgrading, some of the companies we work with, they'll actually go in and they'll take threat intelligence like this and export it into a memorandum for record as saying, these are what the bad guys are saying about this vulnerability that we have on our system, which is why it needs to be removed from the network or patched or upgraded. A little bit different approach we've also seen is some firms we work with, when they make their trouble tickets in Jira or ServiceNow or similar ticketing solution, they'll use our API and they'll populate those tickets with the threat intelligence from the hacker communities. And now when those IT guys see that, and IT guys who do patching, they have competing priorities. They got upgrades and patches to add new capabilities, in addition to upgrades and patches to improve security. When you start, we found that some of our clients who started including that, the security team found that the IT guys were much more responsive when they included threat intelligence information in the tickets as opposed to not. And that's because it's one thing to say, hey, this is very risky. And it's another thing to say risky and this is the evidence. And that's very compelling, and it improved the communication between IT and security. Now, moving back to the slide deck. Go with one more case study. This one we call the Havana exploit, and this was interesting. This is a good news one. The attack did not occur this time, but this was a 2018 software vulnerability, okay? And this vulnerability was present in an environment of a very large global financial institution as recently as May of this year. And it was unpatched, and they knew about it. And it was ranked as being low risk by the National Institute of Standards. And when you looked at the information from the hacker community, in addition to seeing that there were available exploits and exploit code, there was also, what was really interesting, this Russian hacker discussion that describes an attack demonstration at the University of Havana in Cuba. And this really was only knowable through, mining these sources from the hacker communities. This was not widely known that this attack demonstration occurred. And when you see all that information together, you have an understanding of why the machine learning algorithm rated this as being 38 times more likely to be exploited than average. And so the intelligence paints a very different picture than the standard risk-based approach that relies on the National Institute of Standards that said this was low risk. And this dichotomy between what hackers are looking to work on and what they're going to use to prepare for an attack versus what most enterprises use to assess risk, the gap is huge. And hackers know this. And even though they're not overly exploiting the low and medium risk vulnerabilities, they're not under exploiting them either. To put succinctly, the ratings by the National Institute of Standards simply does no better than random guess in determining what hackers are going to use. So when a score all those vulnerabilities below that NIST score, you have the same likelihood of exploitation as you would with the rest. I'll talk a little bit about what we do at Cyricon. So again, as I showed you in the slide on how our platform works, we are analyzing multiple sources, literally hundreds of sources, with our AI-driven algorithms. And we're not only looking at deep and dark web, we're also looking at social media, Reddit, Telegram, and the like, vulnerability management. And the kinds of things I showed you in today is what we're calling ignored threats. There are vulnerabilities where there's a threat against it, and the security team's aware of the vulnerabilities, but they're misassessing the severity of that threat. And that's how things fall through the cracks, like what we've seen. And so we'd like to offer to anyone who's working with the chief security officer on this call, what we call our find ignored threat assessments, where we will review your vulnerability scan and point out these to you. So that is available, and we'll probably have follow up with information on this assessment. So anyway, I'll stop there. So thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much for presenting. One of the things I found interesting from your second case study, the Cozy Bear, was that the time frame between when the vulnerability was announced or discovered and when it became a very high exploitation risk was about 3 months. It sort of changes, we kind of feel like from a 0-day attack, you have 0 days to respond, but this maybe gives you a little bit more opportunity. Is that sort of a standard time frame for from discovery to use?
Unfortunately not. It really varies widely. With that one, we saw it jump up, like you said, after months where there were exploits in the wild. And I'll go back to that screen to show again. So what you see happening here, though, is probably right around when it gets to the yellow. That's normally where you start seeing what are called proof of concept exploits. So that means that hackers are starting to distribute code amongst themselves. And some of this may even also come from the wider security community even. And it's not in the wild yet, but they're working on it, and there's strong evidence of the case. And so that's always the question is, do you really want to wait till the exploits in the wild get reported? And you also have to be aware that, if you're looking at exploit in the wild being reported here, really depending on the threat actor and their level of sophistication, how long have they been using it before it was detected? How many attacks have they launched that have totally gone unnoticed? How many systems they've compromised where they've been on that system for 3 months or so before someone figured it out? The earlier attackers who get this ready first and want to make that money, they're going to also be the most discreet and the most judicious about their targets.
So one of the questions that came in from Michael Lines is, how does Cyricon compare to Tenable's VPR score? And you said you work with a couple of different scanners. How does that work?
Yeah, so we are scanner agnostic. That's the first big difference from Tenable, is that we work primarily with firms where their vulnerability management program is a little bit multi-tiered. And the other key difference between us and Tenable is we provide the actual hack or threat intelligence that goes along with the ranking. So you have that level of transparency. And in terms of, like I said, communicating to IT and communicating to the management to justify certain actions, we're finding that having that threat intel is very critical in making your case.
And then one other question, we do have some time for questions, so probably for both of you. So if you want to go first, Paulo, is how much of this do you see in the US versus worldwide? Are they targeting? Are they coming from the threats? Worldwide versus US?
Oh, it's what we see in turn, and again, we're focused on malware and exploit authors. We're seeing this as definitely a worldwide thing. We collect data globally. We're doing automatic language translation. We see, Chinese, Eastern Europe, Asia Pacific, even South America, and the Middle East. So it's definitely a global phenomenon that we're seeing here.
And Tom, did you want to answer that question as well?
Yeah, for sure. So for the purposes of the research that I presented, we focused on the US. However, what I can say is that having experience in these marketplaces, forums, knowing how the threat actors operate, we do see all the same sorts of documents available to from other countries as well. So we see information from Australia, we see information from Canada, all over Europe. So it's likely, but we'd have to do the research to prove it, that similar fraud programs are being conducted internationally.
A question came in: is your top 5 countries for threat sources? What is your top 5 for threat sources versus countries?
Well, for us, the top 3 would easily be the U.S., Russia, and China. There are many countries outside of that. We do see significant level of activity. So to mind comes Germany, Brazil, Japan, Iran, other countries in the Middle East as well. When you start getting outside the top 3, I think a lot of it really depends on attack style as well. Different parts of the world, you see different tactics, techniques, and procedures emerge.
There's another one, maybe I'll let you have this one, Tom, is do you see hackers impersonating other geographical locations or impersonating to deliver their attacks?
Well, there's certainly, I always talk about this maybe too much if you've spoken to me before, but operational security is one of the core principles that both security professionals need and also the threat actors. So when it comes to impersonations or spoofing locations and things like that, that is something that, yes, we do observe from threat actors trying to maybe tunnel traffic through a different location or utilize a tool that's associated with a different group. These are things that we observe, and so we have to consider them in our analysis and our reports as well. We do that by kind of associating a confidence score or level so that our clients can then benefit from our experience.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for presenting today. It's a welcome change to see, some of the insights that you get from spending time on their communities and learning from what they're doing, and watching the evolution of, how they've changed over the pandemic. I think we'll end it there, and thank you. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks, and it will be on forensics education and extending the number of people in cybersecurity through ethics and forensics teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.